This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.
By 1986, Nintendo was ascending. The Famicom was hot in Japan. The NES had struck gold worldwide. After making cards and toys that eventually turned into arcade cabinets and video game consoles, modern Nintendo had taken shape by this year. After Mario and Zelda set the standard from the core Shigeru Miyamoto-led team, other developers at Nintendo started to experiment and make their own characters in full worlds. The group, headed up by the late Gunpei Yokoi at Research and Development 1, aka R&D 1, debuted one of their more ambitious projects in 1986 with Metroid. Originally a Famicom Disk System joint, it took some time before it came to America, but Metroid soon became an NES classic. But how exactly did that happen? How did Metroid become one of Nintendo's most beloved series? And why is it borderline absent these days? Join me as I go over the path Samus took to get to today and ponder what the future might hold. Metroid is a series that, while often dormant, has always been seen as a shivering jewel in Nintendo's crown. It has been instrumental in essentially creating or redefining genres throughout its 30-plus year history. The reveal of heroine Samus Aran as a woman at the end of the first game is the original go-to twist in gaming. The music is classic and moody, the isolation sublime. While Metroid has gotten some love in the past few years, it's safe to say we're battling to get out of a dormant period right now. Over the generations, Metroid has struggled to find a consistent foothold in Nintendo's release schedule, but it's always on the minds of fans. Right now, we're all wondering when we might be able to explore worlds as Samus on Nintendo Switch, but before we speculate on that, let's dial it back and go over the history of Metroid. Metroid has two prominent series of games right now that are linked in some regards, but overall separate as far as development goes. They can be summed up as, somewhat reductively, 2D Metroid and 3D Metroid. But maybe a more apt name would be Sakamoto Metroid and Tanabe Metroid, respectively, named after the Nintendo producers who work on the different styles. To begin, let's go with the initial style, 2D Metroid. Yoshio Sakamoto was a core contributor to Nintendo's early success, and his enduring legacy is primarily tied to Metroid. After joining Nintendo in 1982, he cut his teeth on projects such as Donkey Kong Jr. and Gumshoe before working on the original Metroid, alongside Satoru Okada, who rarely directed games, but did direct the original Metroid. Okada primarily designed handheld systems and can be called an absolute legend. He retired in 2012. But back to Sakamoto. In addition to having a hand in every 2D Metroid, he also worked on WarioWare, Rhythm Heaven, and Tomodachi Life during his prestigious career at Nintendo. Sakamoto has been at the helm for a slew of Samus's most enduring adventures. While he didn't have a hand in Metroid 2, snaps to Hiroji Kiyotake, the original designer of Samus and Wario, and Hiroyuki Kimura, now working in the Pikmin and 2D Mario series, for directing the Game Boy Great. Sakamoto did direct Super Metroid in 1994, Metroid Fusion in 2002, and Metroid Zero Mission in 2004. Those who lived through it or understand how time works should notice one peculiar detail there. You had 3 Metroid games over an 8-year span, with Metroid, Metroid 2, and Super Metroid. Then you have 8 years with nothing. Sakamoto actually addressed it in a 2010 interview with the now-defunct magazine Games TM. As he said, "I was actually thinking about the possibility of making a Metroid game for N64, but I felt that I shouldn't be the one making the game. When I held the N64 controller in my hands, I just couldn't imagine how it could be used to move Samus around. So for me, it was just too early to personally make a 3D Metroid at that time. Also, I know this isn't a direct answer to your question, but Nintendo at that time approached another company and asked them if they would make an N64 version of Metroid, and their response was that no, they could not. They turned it down, saying that unfortunately they didn't have the confidence to create an N64 Metroid game that could compare favorably with Super Metroid. That's something I take as a compliment to what we achieved with Super Metroid." Following that quote, Sakamoto was pressed about the company involved, and he declined to go further. It paints a fascinating picture, though. Sakamoto and Nintendo couldn't find a way to bring Samus into 3D, so over the course of 8 years, her only appearances were in Super Smash Bros. And a few cameos. How would Metroid solve moving into 3D? Well, Sakamoto wouldn't be much of a part of it, as 2002 marked the start of Metroid's sister series, Metroid Prime. That's when two more major players entered the Metroid development story, Kensuke Tanabe and Retro Studios. Tanabe is the connective tissue for every entry in the Prime series, having produced every game in the series, from the original all the way to Metroid Prime Federation Force. He has a varied history at Nintendo, beginning with working on Super Mario Bros. 2, before becoming a producer who regularly works with the likes of Next Level Games, Intelligent Systems, and, well, Retro Studios. Retro Studios is the Nintendo-owned, Texas-based developer that created the Metroid Prime trilogy, before moving on to Donkey Kong Country for a while, and then eventually coming back to Metroid Prime for the forthcoming fourth entry. Metroid Prime on GameCube was the start of a new era of relevance for Samus Aran. When the game launched in November 2002, it was critically acclaimed, and also accompanied by the next entry in the 2D line of Metroid games, Metroid Fusion. Metroid Fusion debuted on the same day from Sakamoto and his team. The next few years were glorious for fans of the franchise. In 2004, Sakamoto led the development of a remake of the original Metroid on Game Boy Advance, called Metroid Zero Mission, and Tanabe and Retro Studios made Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Metroid Prime Pinball hit DS the next year, followed by Metroid Prime Hunters in 2006. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption concluded the trilogy in 2007. After 2007, the Prime series took a bit of a hiatus. Aside from Retro Studios' 2009 Wii-release Metroid Prime Trilogy, it would be 9 years before Metroid Prime came back with a new game. But before we get to the grossly underrated Metroid Prime Federation Force, let's go back to the Sakamoto end of Metroid. Following Zero Mission, Sakamoto struggled to make another Metroid game for a handful of years. There is a pretty easy answer for what made this tough. In 2004, the same year Zero Mission launched, Nintendo, under new president Satoru Iwata, reorganized the structure of the development teams. Nintendo R&D 1, which we talked about them earlier, and that's the team that Sakamoto had been a part of since the 1980s, that was no more. It was absorbed into Software Planning and Development, or SPD for short. They were more focused on supervising the production of games from second and third party studios. While every so often SPD would develop their own games, the nature of the team that worked on Zero Mission wasn't to make their own games, but to work with other developers, like Intelligent Systems, Monolith Soft, and Next Level Games. That's a large part of the reason why Sakamoto's next Metroid game was co-developed by Team Ninja. Metroid Other M came out in 2010 on the Wii to a decidedly mixed reception. According to Sakamoto and copious rumors from the era, that wasn't the only Metroid game Sakamoto tried to make during that time period. Metroid Dread was a game name that floated around during the late 2000s as a potential DS entry in Sakamoto's story. He confirmed the existence of the game a few times over the years, mentioning, for example, in a 2009 interview with IGN that, quote, "As a concept, the Metroid Dread idea does still exist within my mind, so maybe sometime in the future, I will be able to bring that to you." The existence of Metroid Dread is the only thing locked down. The truth is out there somewhere, but from what I've heard over the years, my theory on Dread is that post-Zero Mission, the team from R&D 1 that moved to SPD tried to get another 2D Metroid off the ground on DS, but the game was a struggle to get far along in development. It needed a co-developer. Going back to the Nintendo 64 days, when Sakamoto couldn't figure out how to make a 3D Metroid, and Nintendo was never able to find a company to work on a new Metroid, it's likely the same issue might have cropped up for a few years again. Dread likely was always a 2D DS game, which wasn't exactly Team Ninja's forte when they joined forces with Nintendo to make a Metroid game. Ergo, Team Ninja made Other M on Wii, which is a weird fusion of some 2D elements with the 3D action the studio is known for. After Other M, the Metroid series was put on ice for 6 years. An announcement of a new game didn't come until 2015, and, well, it wasn't one that folks wanted. Metroid Prime Federation Force was revealed at E3 2015. Developed by Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3 developers Next Level Games, Federation Force has more in common with Metroid Prime Hunters than the mainline Prime games. leading to a lot of disappointment. While it is generally the stance at Nintendo will report that Metroid Prime Federation Force is in fact a good video game, I totally understand the overall disappointment. After 6 years without a new game, 9 since the last well-received new game, the next Metroid game was a spin-off? It's like if Nintendo announced a new Pikmin game, but it was a side-scroller on 3D. Hey, wait a minute. That happened. 2016 might have been a relative rock bottom for the Metroid series at large, but 2017 was a net positive year. E3 2017 featured 2 key announcements: Metroid Prime 4 for Nintendo Switch, and Metroid Samus Returns for the 3DS. Samus Returns was a remake of Metroid 2 under Sakamoto's guidance, developed by Mercury Steam, the Spanish game developer best known for their work on the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series. Samus Returns launched later in 2017, and in my opinion, is really good. On the flip side, Metroid Prime 4 has been, well, basically nothing in the 3 years since it was announced. What is officially known is this. Metroid Prime 4 was announced for Nintendo Switch in 2017. Kensuke Tanabe is producing the game, and until 2019, it was being developed by a brand new team. In early 2019, Nintendo announced that longtime series developers Retro Studios were going to make Metroid Prime 4. Currently, the game is due out sometime in the next Zodiac cycle. Nintendo has said very little of consequence about what Metroid Prime 4 is, but echoing internet rumors, I can kind of confirm behind the scenes that Bandai Namco was in fact working on Metroid Prime 4 for a stretch of time, though that wasn't the only studio involved. But at this point, none of that matters, because Retro Studios is back in the saddle. So now we're caught up to speed. We're sitting here in 2020. What's next for Metroid? The next game we're likely to see in the Metroid series is probably going to be from Yoshio Sakamoto. While nothing is announced, the soundly positive reception of Samus Returns makes me think Mercury Steam is still involved with the Metroid series. It's almost weird we haven't heard anything regarding a new Metroid partnership between Sakamoto and Mercury Steam, because it does just seem so obvious. Mercury Steam has been operating the free-to-play shooter Space Lords since 2017, but a lot of key personnel from Samus Returns are only credited there as special thanks. So that kind of implies that they're probably working on another game, like, I don't know, maybe a new entry in the Metroid series. As for Sakamoto, his current known workload is a pair of remakes of the old adventure games Famicom Tante Club, which hopefully will be brought to America at some point in the future. Please, I would like to play those games. So it's very likely that Mercury Steam is making a Metroid game with Sakamoto, but what is it and when is it coming out? The options for what it could be is a remake or a brand new game. Samus Returns does kinda sorta tease Metroid Fusion, and hey, Mercury Steam initially pitched a Fusion remake. I don't see another remake of the original Metroid happening, so the only other remake possibility is Super Metroid. To me, a Super Metroid remake is akin to, trying to do a remake of something like the original Alien movie. You can do what you want, but that thing is perfect as it is. Don't mess with it. And for what it's worth, I don't believe we will see a Samus Returns HD version on Switch either. It's been 3 years, that gunship has sailed. Though weirder things have happened. If this 2D Metroid is a new game, then hopefully it would be Metroid 5, or hell, maybe even the fabled Metroid Dread. Maybe Sakamoto has found the developer for his long-gestating idea. There's always the possibility that maybe Metroid Dread or Metroid 5 or whatever was teased in some of those super secret 100% secret endings in Samus Returns. But the possibility of whatever this game is releasing in 2020 honestly makes sense. However, COVID-19 is likely to affect Nintendo's game development, especially of games co-developed with other companies. It's not easy to make a game when one part of the team is in Japan and the other is in Spain to begin with. The stress on that situation is even greater in a global pandemic. With that in mind, I think there's a chance we will at least see a 2D Metroid announced in 2020, but more than likely the game won't come around until 2021. As for Metroid Prime 4, let's do some quick math. So we don't know exactly when Metroid Prime 4 began development, but for the sake of argument, let's say like 2017, probably a little bit before it was announced. For about 2 years, the game was developed by an unknown team, likely Bandai Namco. Then, things changed, and the game restarted development in 2019. Retro Studios has been working on Metroid Prime 4 for more than a year and a half by mid-2020. If we are to assume that Metroid Prime 4 is on par with a AAA game, then realistically, the earliest we could see this game is 2022, giving Retro 3 years to make the game. Especially since when Nintendo's Shinya Takahashi stated that, quote, "The change will essentially mean restarting development from the beginning." More likely, especially given potential COVID-related delays and just the regular trials of game development, Metroid Prime 4 seems more likely to arrive sometime in the ballpark of 2023. The potential release gap from Metroid Prime 3 to Metroid Prime 4 could be equal to the gap from the very first Metroid to the first Metroid Prime. That's insane. The horizon for Metroid looks the most promising it has in more than a decade. While not everything has gone according to plan in the past few years, there's a very real possibility we will be playing another new 2D Metroid within the next year or two. And hey, it'll take longer, but there's a new mainline Metroid Prime game on the way for the first time in nearly 15 years. We have years to wait still, but at the end of the day, it's cool that Retro Studios is back on Metroid with Tanabe. And also that Sakamoto is likely still working on 2D Metroid. As long as Samus Aran has adventures to go on, the galaxy will never truly be at peace. But with new Metroid games on the way, our hopes and dreams might be at peace.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.